Now, in other news, Russian officials say at least 18 people have been hurt in a Ukrainian drone attack overnight on regions near the border. The Defense Ministry in Moscow said it had destroyed at least 55 drones. Among the reported targets appeared to be a battery plant in Lipetsk. There's been no immediate comment from Ukraine about the attacks. Both sides deny targeting civilians in their strikes during the war that Russia launched against Ukraine more than 3 years ago. But thousands of civilians have died in the conflict, the vast majority of them from Ukraine. Meanwhile, let's return to that hugely significant day for American foreign policy, which was Monday when President Trump announced a deal to send more U.S. weapons and gave a warning to Vladimir Putin that unless a ceasefire in Ukraine was agreed within 50 days, Washington would impose tariffs on Russia and on nations that trade with it. Well, in the light of those developments, there's been some reaction coming out of the government in Moscow. Well, let's pick up on those Russia-related themes now with the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, who joins me on the line from London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Laskiewicz. And President Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has been holding his daily conference call with journalists, and he commented briefly about Donald Trump's announcement about arms to Kyiv and possible tariffs on Russia, saying that Mr. Trump's announcement was very serious and that part of it was addressed to President Putin. And he said that they need time to analyze what Mr. Trump said, and that if and when Mr. Putin considered it necessary, he would for sure comment on this. So very little there.
Well, quite so. And the reason why there's very little is because President Putin simply is uninterested in this threat from President Trump. There are three aspects to this. First and foremost, the notion of supplying arms. Well, what President Donald Trump wants is for Europe to pay for these arms, let's say the NATO, which is very nice that NATO has been recognized, very nice for Europe that Trump has recognized them, which is on the positive side. The negative side is the European economies are being strained to increase spending on arms and now have to foot the bill for any arms going to Ukraine. It's unclear they'll be able to do so. And what is more, as a result, since they have not actually formally agreed to any of this, it's by no means clear when, or indeed if, any American arms will actually get to Ukraine. As we stand at present, they are going. We are waiting, of course, for the whole financial package to be agreed and for the administration to be set up, because the actually arms will be shipped to Europe and then from Europe to Ukraine, which will take some time. So therefore, President Putin is simply ignoring that aspect. Number two, a ceasefire for 50 days. Well, that gives him 50 days. There is a good aspect to this. Please note that it means that there is an opportunity to negotiate were President Putin that way inclined. And from that point of view, it's a pleasant gesture by Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is that it just gives 50 days more opportunity for President Putin to advance still further. And that is the third point. At present, President Putin is winning this war, is acquiring more territory, and has no intention of stopping. As a result, I'm afraid the Donald Trump initiative is dead. Of course, there's the notion of sanctions. Actually, Russians are uninterested in those. I said on the first day sanctions are next to useless, on the first day of the war publicly. I say that still now. Russia is not a capitalist-minded country. It is interested in its defense. It's interested in its power. It's interested in its glory. It's interested in all sorts, and it uses economics to, for example, countries which are like it get the benefit of cheap Russian oil, to give you an example. And that is it. Whereas America thinks, being capitalist, that every man has his price and so does every nation. And this is where Donald Trump is going wrong. It's not a deal. It's politics, not business. And the net effect of all this is the war will continue.
Nevertheless, Dr. Laskiewicz, when he was pushed on the fact that Donald Trump said he was disappointed with Vladimir Putin, I mean, Mr. Peskov wouldn't say anything more, telling the reporter to refer back to what he said at the outset, and this was all he was going to say on the subject. I mean, does that sound like the Kremlin is a little bit rattled by what President Trump announced yesterday?
No. What the Kremlin does, I'm not sure you know this, but it analyzes every president very carefully. Even if there were no suggestions because of President Donald Trump's visit to Russia of anything else, the fact of the matter is the Russians take this very, very seriously. Their analysis of Donald Trump, as far as I can tell, is that he's unstable, anything can provoke him. And as a result, it's best to keep the talking to a minimum, to try and work out whether there are points of agreement, and definitely not to rile him in any way. As can be seen, after all, suddenly he's done a volte-face and he's beetling off in the other direction because previously he's pro-Russian, and now suddenly he's talking about sending arms to Ukraine and piling on sanctions. Therefore, the reason why they gave that is not because they're rattled, it's because they have to analyze quite carefully how to phrase the sentence so as not to annoy President Donald Trump any more than necessary and not annoy him at all, if possible.
Interesting point. So is it likely that at some point we'll hear from President Putin about what he thinks about all this?
Yes, but it'll take some time. They're going to play for time. The Russians are old hands at this. They've had centuries of this. They've run rings around other countries. Please remember Poland being one of them. And so what they're going to do is they're going to spread it out. They may not reply for 49 days, for example, only a last moment reply, which will, of course, spread out the negotiations a bit more, whilst all the time pressing forward militarily. Actually, when you use the word rattled, it's President Donald Trump, which has given some hint of his exasperation, maybe to the point of worry, because he actually contacted the BBC and Great Britain, which is very unusual for him. And so the implication there is suddenly looking for allies or support, which is indication rather that President Donald Trump is rattled because his entire strategy, in effect, has failed. But the answer is yes, there will be reply by President Putin in his own good time.
And we're just seeing on the wires that the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, has given an interview to the TASS news agency saying that Russia rejects ultimatums. And yet, I wonder if you'll agree, Dr. Laskiewicz, with those who say that Russia will be concerned about the possibility of secondary sanctions being put on its trading partners. I mean, could that potentially have an impact?
Actually, it's the other way around, if anything, unfortunately. First of all, the business of Russia not taking ultimatums. This is simply a signal that Russia is not going to cave in to President Donald Trump's demands, but President Putin will answer all the same. So that's that one out of the way. These secondary sanctions, please note, secondary sanctions can backfire. If India, and especially China, decide that they will carry on trading with Russia, at that point, suddenly, they are in effect in a sort of trade war again with America. So were he to apply secondary sanctions, he might find that some countries decide to go with Russia as opposed to America, because this type of, as they see it, bullying is precisely what they're complaining about in this unipolar world. They want a multipolar world. If that happens, he actually may build up enemies. It's very tricky politics. An action which, on the face of it, may you think will force somebody to come to your side, for example, China and India, may actually have the quite opposite effect of pushing them into Russia's hands. Please remember, Russia, China, India are going away from using the dollar. They have a common language. Please remember, Russian raw materials, cheap and arriving, are something they look forward to. There is a commonality there. And okay, America's a big market, but it's an unstable market at present. It's got all sorts of threats of sanctions, and therefore who knows how this threat of Donald Trump's may work out. I would say it's by no means clear-cut that such secondary sanctions will work. We'll see how they pan out.
And of course, those secondary sanctions come with a caveat. I mean, they won't be introduced for 50 days, and a lot can happen and change in 50 days. I mean, that gives plenty of time for Moscow and Washington to sit down and talk if they want to. And it gives the Kremlin time to come up with counter proposals, and as you suggested, it also gives time for Russia to continue to do what it's doing right now on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, doesn't it?
Quite right. I'll go further. It gives them time to negotiate with China and India. There's 50 days is a long time, as you put it. Harold Wilson famously said, when he done a volte-face once, a week is a long time in politics, and we've got far more than a week here, more than a month. So in that time, much can happen, but don't think Russia is going to take it all passively. I anticipate talks with its allies and fellow allies. I anticipate quite possibly talks with Europe. And as for the Trump, I anticipate them waiting more towards the end and then making, as you suggested, counter proposals or agreeing to more negotiations or whatever, anything to spin things out.
So really the upshot of all this is that both Dmitry Peskov and Sergei Ryabkov have said that Russia will push on with what it's doing in Ukraine and with the so-called special military operation. But also Moscow reckons that these decisions taken by Washington and the EU and NATO are seen by Ukraine as a signal not for peace, but to continue the war. Do you agree?
Yeah, Russians, you see, tend to look at everything the other way around, and by no means wholly incorrectly, by the way. Russia has been saying that is owing to the America, especially, and Europe's support for Ukraine, that Ukraine fought on. This is, I think, true to some degree. Ukrainians want to fight, but without that logistics support, in military terms, Ukraine would have been unable to hold out against Russia. So from Russia's point of view, it is quite that in fact the West, by supporting Ukraine, are prolonging the war. From our point of view, or rather from the West's point of view, it's the other way around, of course. It's Russia which is pressing and the West is defensive. It all depends whose viewpoint you take. The long and the short of it is, if you like, better from the sort of neutral point of view, non-aligned, is that the war will continue and that each side will continue to blame the other, and it is unlikely in the near future to stop.
As always, Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you ever so much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the International Affairs Analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London.